Hello again. I will not deny that I'm glad that the jazz festival has now ended here. One of the stages was just 25 yards from our house, and it's meant that I've been unable really to do much recording in the evenings because the sound has been overpowering. Reckon is a great place to live, but I could perhaps live quite happily without a 3-day music festival practically next door. Still, it's only once a year. Once upon a time, long ago, there lived on Earth not one kind of human, but four. One of these groups was brutish and ape-like, but the others were rather like us, although they weren't able to do much of any great interest. One type of human was able to make crude clothes out of animal skins, and they decorated themselves with feathers and beads made from shells. They had a special liking for the feathers of eagles and used them to indicate status, rather as some tribes of Native Americans once did. These people also made rudimentary geometric patterns by scratching rocks or painting a few straight lines on the walls of caves. Deep within these caves they built shrines, and they also enacted rituals when they buried their dead, which suggested the first glimmerings of religion were stirring within them. Today we know these men and women as the Neanderthals. They occupied the whole of what would one day be Europe as well as part of Asia. In the continent we now call Africa were other people with similar abilities who had reached about the same technological level as the people living in Europe. This population are commonly known today by the Latin name of Homo sapiens. It is possible, by no means certain, that the glacially slow technological and cultural progress made by those in Africa and others in Europe and Asia might one day have led to civilization. New developments, though, took place on a timescale measured in hundreds of thousands of years, and it's equally likely that these primitive humans would, over the course of many millennia, have remained at the same level or even regressed. One of their forebears, the species called Homo erectus, continued to use the same kind of stone tools with no improvement for a staggering period of over 1 million years. Homo erectus, incidentally, lingered on in Africa and in Southeast Asia and came into contact later with Homo sapiens. There was nothing inevitable or even especially likely about any of these four species eventually emerging as sentient beings like modern humans. Then, roughly 50,000 years ago, something remarkable happened. In Africa, the new species called Homo sapiens emerged, and some of them migrated to the Middle East, where they met and bred with Neanderthals. This equipped them with new genes. The descendants of those explorers continued to Africa, where they came across another species, the Denisovans. The Denisovans and Neanderthals had already been mixing, and so when the Homo sapiens bred with them, there emerged a new group with genetic legacy of all three species combined. The Homo sapiens who remained in Africa interbred with what is sometimes referred to as a ghost population of archaic humans, almost certainly Homo erectus. This mating left a very strong genetic heritage in those living in West Africa, whose descendants went on to become the Bantu. There has been debate about whether we should properly call the Neanderthals, Denisovans, and Homo sapiens separate species, because they bred together and produced fertile offspring so readily. Most scientists do describe them so. This raises the intriguing possibility that we might regard the products of the interbreeding of those four human species as separate species in themselves. This would give us three main groups, whether you describe them as species, subspecies, ethnicities, or races. And these correspond roughly to the three great main traditional races of humanity. In Europe, there is the hybrid Homo sapiens and Neanderthal. In East Asia, the Homo sapien and Neanderthal and Denisovans. And in Africa, the Bantu, who had their origins in West Africa and now dominate the continent south of the Sahara. These were a mixture of Homo sapiens and an earlier species, probably Homo erectus. Of course, this does, as I say, depend whether you classify Neanderthals and Denisovans as separate species. But if so, then we see the possible genetic foundations of a model which divides humanity into three main races.